morning, good afternoon, good day, everybody. This is Michael Lappin with Nuix. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a really interesting topic that we've dug into pretty deeply. Both Bill and I are excited to present this. We're talking about metrics today. We're talking about different ways to measure the effectiveness of your data processing. We're going to talk about metrics that are technical, metrics that follow your cases throughout their life cycles, as well as administrative metrics. So all kinds of good things that we count on. I think generally speaking, the customers that we have that are measuring their progress using Nuix are having the most success. And we're going to get into that maturity quite a bit today. So a little about me. You'll notice there's a bit of gray hair on the head there. That's because I started doing e-discovery 1993, if you can believe that, before it had an E on the front of it. And I used to be a deposition officer out in California, served a lot of subpoenas. We're going to talk a little bit about third-party subpoenas today as part of the metrics discussion. I have the privilege now of running the solutions consulting team for the Americas. That's 22 of the finest technical resources in the world get to work with me, so I enjoy that quite a bit. Now with me today is a good friend of mine and teammate, Bill Potter. Bill, would you like to jump in and say hello?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I got started in the e-discovery space pretty much right out of college at Los Angeles. I spent about 2.5 years working with a large consulting firm building economic damages models in antitrust and IP litigation. And a big part of that was looking for business records in their concordance database. And so that was my first introduction to this space. And so I decided to make a career out of it. I spent a couple of years as a lit support analyst in the basement of law firms here in New York City. Prior to joining Nuix, I spent several years advising large corporations on how to structure and staff their e-discovery teams. So the people side of people processing technology is really important to me. My role here at Nuix, I work with our large corporate clients in New York and Massachusetts, primarily on the financial service and pharmaceutical side. And, I'm particularly enthusiastic about helping people start off strong, because if you start well, you usually end well. So a little bit of what we're going to try and talk about today are the lessons that our established clients have learned about building data processing capabilities and how to do it successfully. Because this is definitely something that's been in the market for a while, but is hard to get right. So a couple of the things that we'll talk about today, we'll go through five things to measure, to keep an eye on, how those metrics impact things like resource planning, project management and workflow, and ultimately department management. For anybody who's joining us for the very first time, example use cases, things like digital forensic investigations, supporting electronic discovery for litigation and regulatory disclosures, information governance, and increasingly the cybersecurity space is a big area for data processing requirements. A little bit about the Nuix corporate landscape. We have over 300 corporate clients around the globe. Majority are actually in the banking, finance, and insurance space, just because they're at that nexus of highly regulated, data intensive, and also have grown through merger and acquisition over the past 30 years or so. You'll also recognize oil and gas, pharmaceutical, internet, computer, and technology. A significant portion of our clients are here in the United States, or at least in the Americas, but we've got strong presence in EMEA and APAC. And this is important because it's one thing to set up a local data processing lab, but coordinating across the global deployment has its own kinds of challenges that we'll talk a little bit about as well. So some of the things that we see our clients doing with Nuix and with data processing tools in general, things like internal investigations, right, for HR disputes or internal complaints, electronic discovery, incident response is increasingly a big one, making sure that, if you detect an anomaly, you're able to track it down inside of a couple of hours. The time frame is radically different, which I think is interesting. Monitoring for insider threats, bad actors, whether they're malicious or just doing the wrong thing unintentionally. Information governance is a big one, and data remediation. The challenges that we see our clients bumping into, and this is kind of across the spectrum, growing regulatory pressure is a big one, increasing data volumes, as we'll see in a little bit. There's also a bit of a skill gap, right, particularly in the cybersecurity space, but you can make the argument in e-discovery and digital forensics and just data management, there aren't a lot of people who actually know how to do this work and know how to do it at scale or across multiple different functions. And that gets into some of what we're really seeing, which is the pressure to do more with less, which often requires that people work well with other functions and start to set up more of a cross-functional team and having to manage a cross-functional team, which is its own set of challenges. Michael, I'm wondering if you could maybe weigh in, since you do a lot of the detail work with our large clients, what are some examples of like a regulatory driver that you see in the market right now?
Well, I mean, the one that seems to be at the front of mind is the GDPR legislation in Europe that's affecting many of the financial institutions, big banks, and other corporations that do business in Europe. We know that we're having to play by those rules for the customers that are qualified to do business as such. That one is probably the one we're hearing the most about, and that actually provides for something that we've been trying to push for years, which is the idea of governance includes deletion, like large quantities of stuff needs to be thrown away. So much of the time when we've done migratory type of projects, customers don't take advantage of the chance to throw some things away.
Yeah,
so Bill,
storage
does that resonate with you?
That 4% of global revenue is a fine. That's not cheap at all. Yeah. The other one that I've heard a lot about is in the financial service sector here in New York. The New York State Financial Authority is also putting pressure on people from a cybersecurity perspective to get rid of data that doesn't have a business purpose. The other one that's right in the news right now is the Internet of Things and the Fitbit tracker that was introduced as part of a murder trial. I think we're going to start to see more of those atypical sources of data. And those are particularly challenging to deal with. They're just, you haven't seen them before. They're not as predictable. So I think that's an interesting thing. Definitely. Okay, so the 5 things that we're really seeing our clients manage and try to optimize. The first one is definitely throughput, right? How much data can you push through your processing labs in a given hour, right? And this informs everything from response time to the second thing, which is capacity, right? How much data could you process if you really had to do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always on, right? What kind of throughput could you expect? And that kind of gets to the third thing, which is utilization, right? So if you understand what your capacity is like, well, what's your current utilization? And that really gets to the fourth point, which is the marginal cost per unit, right? So you think of a common challenge in the intellectual property space in retail, right? They've got factories set up in other countries that have kind of lower protections on IP. Those factories manufacture the authorized products for 12 hours a day, and then they stand idle, so somebody spins them up and uses them to manufacture non-authorized items, right? So maximizing your capacity, I think, is a really important consideration from a cost control and value maximization. And then the fifth thing that people pay real attention to is change, right? Change over time, change as you make investments in people and process and technology, and really allowing you to optimize your data processing capabilities. So what we'll talk about today is really how those 5 concepts can be applied to resource management, right, and optimizing the maturity of your team and your capability. Project management and workflow, right, how a metrics mindset can really help to inform your project strategy. And then we'll talk about department management, because the department itself is one of the challenges that our clients bump into from a management perspective as they try and grow and increase their utilization. So the resource management, this is a big thing that I'm particularly enthusiastic about. Michael and I last year put together the Nuix feature maturity table, and we really encourage our clients to understand this early and to map out their priorities and align kind of early priorities versus secondary priorities. Where are you today? Where do you want to get to? Right. So, for example, a lot of our clients will start thinking about the bottom 3 boxes there in terms of just dealing with a backlog of data. You've already collected it. Now you need to process it and investigate it and review it. And as you get comfortable there, you can start to go tackle more active projects that have urgent disclosure requirements or where you have to start collecting the data yourself. And it's really about planning this progression so that you can start to really expand your utilization, right? As you get comfortable using the tool, you can move out, you can start to tackle some of the more advanced features, and then really move into more of an enterprise use case where you're supporting multiple different requesting parties, preferably on a multi-location or global basis. So clearly, you don't want to read the maturity model on the screen here, but we just want to introduce the concept in terms of having a deliberate adoption plan and tracking metrics to make sure that, one, you're on track, and two, that that you're seeing the value of growing that maturity, because different clients have different requirements. We totally understand that. Michael, it might be helpful. Could you share your perspective on some of the more advanced clients, kind of enterprise clients, and how they're using the tool versus the folks who are more in phase 2 and 3 of just focused utilization?
Yeah, to your point, Bill, I think that what they're seeing is they have a lot of confidence. They've been doing this a while, and they tend to see the value of expansion. So they inherently sort of understand that more is better, both in the maturity of the metrics as well as just the maturity of the technology use. So to your point, lots of different locations, disparate types of data in different places being processed and utilized for any of the basic use cases that you laid out earlier. They tend to have good executive sponsorship, so they have people that are fairly high up in the organization that recognize the value of doing this. They tend to also have lots and lots of data and also have lots of regulatory pressure. And as they continue to grow up and to the right of this maturity matrix, so you're going from bottom left to top right, we see more of the Nuix products being utilized, or Nuix products being used in conjunction with other industry-leading products that are part of a particular perfected workflow, if you like. So yeah, I think particularly important is the metrics themselves indicate a higher level of maturity. So we see people that are doing the stuff we're talking about on this webinar. They tend to be people that are climbing up and to the right.
It's interesting. When we were first discussing this, one of the points that Michael had made was the concept of a hero, right? Somebody who wants to make a bit of a name for themselves because they've caught the bug. They've got a vision for the value this has to the organization. And it's sort of the difference between somebody who wants to push the boundaries and someone who's got a specific mindset and a mandate and just wants to optimize that mandate. But Michael, you mentioned the show the value, and I think this is a critical component, right? Like, if I can sit there and tell you why I think everyone should be an enterprise Nuix client, but at the end of the day, you want to figure out whether it makes sense for your organization today, and then over the course of the next couple of years, right? And so, this is just the assessment that Nuix encourages our clients to work through, that informs our value and ROI models. A couple of the things that really stand out to me as drivers are, do you understand the growth year to year of data in your organization, right? Some organizations estimated at 15 to 20%, industry standards 40%. I've heard people say upwards of that, right? And at 40%, you're almost doubling every 2 years, which no CFO that I know has their general counsel double their budget every 2 years. That's kind of the opposite of where they want to go. The other kind of big consideration here is human workload, right? How much time do your employees spend on data processing versus informing case strategy or advising on how to handle specific investigations or actually doing the investigations themselves. A lot of our clients are trying to get out of the business of processing their data and into the business of advising case strategy or the actually doing the investigation, right? Because there's that skill gap. You want to keep people focused on what they're excited about and what they're good at. So we usually take these inputs and push them through to just a kind of financial forecasting model, you'll want to put together your own or work with there's a number of different experts and service partners who can help you do this evaluation. A couple of the things that, as I mentioned, you want to pay attention to year-to-year growth, right? That really drives spend. You also want to pay attention to what you're comfortable doing today, right? Finding the right balance of work that your team can do versus people that you want to partner with, particularly with more complex data or more urgent matters. It's helpful to have a couple of different relationships with partners in the market. But you also want to think about how do these requirements change over time, right? Because if your data is growing at 25 to 40% a year, you don't have the luxury of keeping steady state, right? Steady state costs you money at the end of the day. So those are some of the things to think about. And as you ask yourself, what maturity level is right for my organization today versus where do I want to be in the next couple of years, you want to have a pretty rigorous financial model that goes into justifying that resource allocation. So some of the key things to take away from the resource management component of this conversation, and I laughed at myself when I picked lock icons for key ideas, so I apologize for the pun. The first key idea is don't try and do it all yourself, right? Most people don't have the staff and don't want to bear the risk. Find the right balance of this activity. Second key idea is show value early, right? And that can be everything from quick turnaround time to just staying on track, right? For a lot of people, the confidence of managing up comes with having an adoption plan and sticking to it. Being able to show with metrics and hard numbers and good reporting that you are on track and building value. One of the things we definitely see with our successful clients is a backlog of data, right? This gives them a chance to maximize utilization early and also build comfort with the tool because repetition equals learning. And so if you've got high throughput, you're working through the activity and you're getting comfortable and you're defining workflows that are right for you upfront and early. And then the last piece, I think, is planning for ongoing improvement. Really familiarizing yourself with your tools' capabilities and which ones are easy for people to use and which ones are more advanced, and what's the value of investing in your people and your resources in order to take advantage of some of the more advanced features. Those are some of the key ideas. Michael, what are your thoughts? What are some of the resource management lessons that our clients mentioned to you?
Well, definitely the backlog, the bottom left of this screen is one of the things I see popping up. I recently did a POC, a proof of concept, where the ability to think about and be aware of and maybe dig up old to-do lists of projects, small and large, that maybe were put on the shelf because there wasn't the capacity to do as much as they'd like. I tend to see those things being dusted off and sort of, finding their way to the forefront. And I think that's what we're going to talk about a little bit right now. So getting into project management. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I think that you're right on the money in terms of the backlog and focusing on, which features can be tackled early. And, so I'm looking forward to this next section here.
Yeah. So we're going to dig into a little bit of technology now, talk about some tools and some sort of concrete, tangible things you can put your hands on and put your eyeballs on that help. I think at this point we're going to start opening up a door to a larger world, if you will. So things that we could take advantage of if we weren't so worried and have our head down into the current workflow and maybe the drudgery perhaps of the limits of that. So we'll open up some discussion about other things you can do now. Also noting that some of the advanced features that we can and will deploy seem to indicate very deliberate improvement requirements. In other words, we have those executive sponsors. We have people comfortable with the tools. We have some experts. We have some advisors. We have valuable partners involved in doing the counting of all of the different metrics that we're going to talk about, so that it shows that increased perfection and sort of that professionalism around all of this management. Okay, so things that we could do if we don't have to worry about processing capacity. In other words, if you use Nuix with lots of cores and its patented scalability, you could increase the amount of time you have to do other things. Specific things that you could take advantage of using Nuix technology is only processing as much of the data, creating as much of an index as you need to. So with Nuix, you have a very highly customizable index, and when you're beginning your processing, you have a whole screen of settings to decide how robust of an index I need to have. I always recommend to customers, don't build bigger index than you need. So for instance, if you can start out with a metadata-only scan of some quantity of data, you're going to double your speed. You're going to have a much smaller footprint of index, so the volume per item is small. The items per hour you're going to be able to process is often twice as fast. And then when you do find those custodians, perhaps, that are going to be in scope, you can simply reload their data for a full text or other index that will provide you the ability to find things like named entities and do keyword searches and all those things that come with the identification of the custodians. So a very practical approach is to start with a fast speed index that you can do some stuff with. So have no fear, a metadata index has a whole lot of value. You do have an MD5 hash of everything so that you can do deduplication. You have all of those good attributes around things like emails, like tos and froms and dates, and things that will help you decide, what's in scope from a date range perspective. So this is one of the things you can do. Another thing that our customers are finding really interesting and powerful is the Sensitive Data Finder tool, which is now well into its 2.4 version. There's a little picture right there on the right where you can see some of the reflection of some of the things we found in a sensitive data finding operation. And what that means is, hey, instead of indexing a bunch of data and making that commitment, let's just go out and use some agents to go and probe various sources, including things like SharePoint, Office 365, file systems, etc. And let's see if we can find things that hit on specific and very granular search criteria. In other words, is there exposure out here, over here, and maybe over here? And that helps us contain scope, right? And perhaps understand a little bit of proportionality within a particular investigation or case. So unknown repositories can often have surprises. So why not use some technology that just gets you a feel for, if you will, a feel for what might be out there. And then furthermore, we have something called worker-side scripting within our workstation product and that utilizes the traditional Nuix engine, which I'll talk about here. So worker-side scripting allows for surgically precise processing operations. So if you know what it is you're looking for, in other words, I used to write subpoenas, exhibits quite a bit, and a lot of time they were really too broad. But occasionally they were well managed and they were very specific, and they had specific people mentioned and specific date ranges mentioned. Well, by all means, you can take advantage of that with the Nuix worker-side scripting capability, which allows you to say, look, I've got this huge repository. Maybe it's an archive. Maybe it's a massive file system of home shares, things like that. We only want email from a specific date range from various correspondence is a perfect example. Or we only want this type of file that mentions the word contract. Maybe it's a PDF, something like that. And that helps us decide, do we want to proceed with this? Perhaps the opposing counsel may have a bit of a scope challenge that we need to go back to them and say, hey, we're not doing that. That's too much data. Or really, when we're doing the search according to your keyword list, we're not finding much, right? So you start to have those conversations that prevent ongoing costly back and forth and meet and confer conferences, etc. Of course, you can do deduplication now at the time of processing. Nuix can do the deduplication right up front. So let's not even bother to look at that, and let's not waste, Nuix user time executing those types of commands. So obviously with this, the proportionality balance changes, right? And what I was talking about earlier when I introduced my background, I used to serve upwards of, my team would get up to about 250 subpoenas served a day in person in the state of California. I think our one-day record was 453 subpoenas served. That's a lot of work for third parties, particularly, medical facilities, insurance companies. And then, of course, the FOIA request, same idea. So these third-party impacts that many of our customers feel are made easier by the fact that they can be more surgically precise about their responses, so they can quickly and easily turn things over. They're not party to the action. This is really a cost center, and really it's a burden. But they have to do it. They have to play fair. They have to be good corporate citizens, so they have to incur this. So doing it as efficiently as possible is the way to go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about reference libraries. Okay, so let's say that you've adopted a lot of Nuix. Some customers have 12 cores of Nuix, which can process 60 gigs per hour of loose data, you know, so very high speeds. Over a terabyte a day is very common amongst most of our corporate customers. Now that we have the ability to scale that up and we recognize this capacity, what else could we do? What else might we think about doing? One that I see frequently done is the processing of frequent flyer custodians and their data, particularly their email. So in other words, the people that we always have to turn over in every one of these patent lawsuits, let's keep them indexed and ready to be produced iteratively. That's a big one. I find that it's very easy to process very quickly things like Microsoft Exchange, SharePoint, various cloud sources like Box and Dropbox and iCloud, etc. And then, of course, just your good old-fashioned file systems. So some quantity of consistently currently indexed data is very, very helpful. I have a specific pharmaceutical company that has turned towards this kind of a workflow because they're just so sick of doing the same things over and over, slowly and painfully. And I'll definitely tell a few more war stories about them and others here shortly. Maybe it makes sense to use data from old cases. Maybe it doesn't. I definitely have a couple of customers that are deleting data that comes off legal hold, but possibly some of that data from old cases for some of our customers does come in handy. So there's a variety of sort of alternatives here that you might consider that are even beyond this basic e-discovery and investigation response. Things like insider threat, compromise indicators, doing some compliance audits, checking and sampling data for specific behavior, words and phrases, hot lists, things like that. Also anti-corruption efforts, anti-money laundering efforts, looking at communication patterns, sort of unusual, suspicious communication patterns throughout different times of the year, and then deletion. See, we have a couple of customers that are doing some aggressive deletion of old email archive data now that has come out of an archive in large quantity, and they have some rules, some definitions of what needs to go away. Bill, I think you might have an anecdote around this. Tell me about another alternative use case.
Yeah, reference libraries, I think, are a really powerful workflow, just because it takes the burden of knowing everything off of the investigator and allows them to kind of focus on being an investigator and drawing insights and spend less time being a researcher. So, steps you can take to kind of enrich the data itself and minimizing the human aspect of that, I think, is really valuable. I think a great example is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, right? So we've got a client, it's a global manufacturing client. They do business all around the world. And this example always kind of resonated with me because I'm a sales guy, right? So I understand quota pressure. And so what these guys do is at the end of every quarter, they process emails between their sales team and their finance team, particularly those that are sent close to the end of the quarter and after hours, because they found that that's when sales guys try and find a way around compliance controls and financial policy, right? And they've recognized the value for their organization of a reputation for doing good business, and it really helps them draw the right balance in terms of where they can do business, take advantage of high-risk locations by doing business with good people and people who have a lot of integrity. So that's just one of my very favorite stories because it's not standard discovery or compliance. It's just brand protection and maintaining the value of their reputation.
That's great. We're going to get into some more of these case studies too. That's a good one, definitely. We've got quite a few more to go through. So how about keywords? Keywords. Let's talk about that a little bit. So with a Nuix index, of course you're able to search for keywords by the hundreds and thousands using the search and tag module, which allows you to put together many, many searches, line them up, and push the go button to have all that data sliced and diced as you wish. That makes for a very powerful, sort of a position as a defendant or as a plaintiff, frankly. Sampling, the ability to do regular, random, repeatable searching is an auditing, regularity. But even in e-discovery, being able to sample what is, large quantities of data that are already indexed allows you to sort of, confine or again, count, put a metric around how much of this respondent data is really out there, and then perhaps take a different position with the opposing counsel. Shingling, if you don't know what that is, that's the grouping of 5-word phrases. So often the context within a keyword and how it is used is going to be really indicative of whether you have a lot of false positives, and perhaps if some of the keyword lists and the Boolean operations that we're using are ineffective, and the things that you've been asked to retrieve are not necessarily going to be accurate or respondent or truly in scope, and therefore probably not worth handing over or producing. Again, this allows an offensive posture that many defendants don't usually find themselves in. They find themselves in the scramble, the reactive, and the less than prepared state a lot of the time. We've got a couple case studies around keywords. Bill, I'm going to let you take this first one regarding this large financial institution.
Yeah, I think this is just such a great example of a metrics mindset, right? So I had one of our clients pulled me aside at a conference recently to talk about the search and tag report. And this really just allows you to build incremental search queries and see the total impact that has on unique hits, total hits, and then hits plus family members. And that's just the first thing he does, right? And he walks into meetings, meet and confers, and keyword negotiations internally and with the requesting party, and really just highlights this keyword right here has a significant impact on the volume of data that we would end up having to produce to you. And so you're going to have to justify why that keyword specifically is included in your request, right? And sometimes they go so far as to sample those uniquely responsive items to look through it themselves and say, listen, we've looked at it. We don't think any of this information is responsive. So you either have to make a compelling case or you have to cover the costs of that production. And it's a very powerful tool because he's done the homework. He's got the numbers. And, someone has to be, they have to have a really good reason for including that key term. And ultimately, it helps to blunt the sword of e-discovery, right? A lot of people will ask for data that they don't really need because they know it costs a lot to get it to them, and it motivates settlement. So I think that's a really great story.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's another large New York City-based bank that is doing something similar. They seem to be obsessed with the analytics of culling. So their workflow isn't that unusual, right? They're processing data. They're doing it very quickly. Then they're doing deduplication. Then they're doing some shingling. Then finally they're doing some searching and tagging, and then they're producing data into their review platform. So not that unusual. Pretty pedestrian by Nuix standards, but they're doing it in large quantity. But the thing that's interesting to note about them is their maturity around measurement. In other words, what is our dedupe percentage? Did our data, was it reduced in size by 30%, 35, 40%? With our searching and tagging, how many items are we going to have to produce out of the case? How long exactly is that going to take? So their ability to measure all of this workflow keeps them sane and really helps them understand their capacity. What can we really handle with these amount of people, these amount of resources, and our level of training and understanding? So that's one that's going to kind of take us kind of a segue really into talking about departmental management. So we've talking about the metrics of the data and the metrics of the case, and now we're going to talk about managing labor costs. So it's not just about the processing capacity bottleneck. There's also an administrative thing here, right? So hiring more people is easy, but administering them is more difficult and maybe not available. Throwing more bodies at problems in most cases, is not an available choice. So collecting the case metrics and making sure we know what we can do is probably the best way to do it. And then again, back to that bank, optimizing what we have available to us, examining any method by which we can go faster and we can go through more cases more quickly is the key. So with Nuix, of course, you have some opportunities here to check on processing settings. Nuix is up to 2,500 different file types that it can process. That's a lot, and sometimes you don't need them, right? You can actually leave out certain types of files and system files and things like that. So auditing the processing settings of each case is important. Furthermore, if you do have what is considered to be the perfect processing setting and configuration profiles, you can save that, and in Nuix you can reuse it. So in other words, if you've got a blessed configuration profile, in other words, this is what we expect to do every time because that's highly defensible and we can stand on that and we can audit that, by all means, eliminate any human error that might be caused by tinkering around in the case settings, right? You also want to go back to what I said before, is let's optimize our speed. Let's not process things we don't have to. Let's not make a full text index if we don't have to. So we have a couple of different customers that are measuring specifically utilization and optimizing performance when it comes to the people part of this. The first one is a very large insurance company in the Northeast. They mostly do investigations, so they're more forensic in nature, and they have many, many cases. They have hundreds of cases each. They're smaller, but there's definitely lots and lots of matters that they're investigating. Different people's conduct. Some of them are HR related. Others are insider threat type of investigation. And what they do is they run a report using a tool that one of my solutions consultants built, the Universal Case Reporting tool, which we'll talk about a little bit more, to run a case investigator report. And what they focus on is simply how much time an investigator is spending on a particular case. Why is this case taking so much of your time, right? So their managers can then help them understand and help everyone understand, wow, this particular investigation is very, very costly, and vice versa. This one was pretty easy. Also, is there opportunity to get better at using the tool set? Is there something that they could learn, a trick, a script, something that would allow them to do their job a little bit better and maybe enjoy it a little bit more too? Another one that I was part of is a very well-known bank in New York City, where one of my solution consultants and I were visiting them just for a meet and greet, just to say hi, and they complained of some fairly slow processing times, 3 to 5 gigs per hour with an 8-core Nuix server, which, if you know your Nuix, that's really, really slow. So what we did is we just looked over their shoulder and we did a little tinkering with their settings. We restarted some processing, and lo and behold, we were able to achieve a 10x increase in their processing speed. And this would also be akin to a 10x speed increase for their production speed, because their workers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're not bogged down with a bunch of tasks that aren't working for them. We simply tinkered with the RAM settings and a few other things, and lo and behold, they were off and running and being a lot more productive. So that was a really good visit to that particular customer. Bill, anything you want to add around optimizing performance and measuring utilization?
Well, I love that particular story because it's a great example of the challenge from an administrative and management component to doing this stuff successfully, right? A lot of teams are built of subject matter experts with a background in investigation and not necessarily in a background of data processing, right? So they didn't even think to ask why it was slow. They were just expressing frustration, right? And so that's why I think tracking metrics like throughput and capacity utilization are so important, because it helps a manager do their job of showing value and also identifying when something's going differently than it should, right? You don't have to be an MBA to look at throughput and understand that it's lower than it should be. So that just, for me, really speaks to the value of getting started right, and then calling up your partners when you need help.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's expand on this. Let's take this a little bit farther here. So what I've found is, just in general in life, things that are counted, in other words, things with metrics associated with them that are perused or looked at or evaluated, they tend to improve. Processes improve, companies improve, profitability improves, etc. So that being said, we actually had one of my SEs built this universal case reporting tool. There's a couple little screenshots here. And on the right, you can see all of the different types of reports that we currently can produce. Now, we mentioned that insurance company, hundreds of cases. You can actually run this tool across all of these cases now to gather metrics and aggregate them across all of the different things you're doing, or even just some of the different cases. So we actually look at the case databases, we collect this information, and then we present it as a report. You can actually do search term hits across all cases, not just for one case, but let's show me all of the hits I get for all of these different cases for these particular search terms, which is nice because this goes back to utilizing things you've already done. Old cases, you might be able to mine or harvest data from them in your latest effort, right? And there's some simple things around case size, around processing speed, how many gigs per hour that we can actually process. And by the way, this tool actually allows you to search all of the cases at one time. So it's a universal search tool as well, which is very, very powerful. The cost per gigabyte process, you can see that's going to associate directly with the processing speed, gigs per hour, and that is maybe the most powerful metric that we talk about today. That's the one that you have to know. That's that most important cost that allows you to, be nimble and be agile and understand your limits as well. Usually the people that have that, the up-to-date latest understanding of that cost per gig, and that the one we just talked about, the bank that changed theirs from 3 to 5 gigs per hour up to 40-ish gigs per hour, obviously that cost just changed for them and they're getting a lot more value. And now once you have these accurate metrics, you can plug them into your estimator tool. Bill showed his earlier. And hey, let's see, is this paying off? Is this actually making sense? Is there something we need to do? Or are we in trouble? Are we in the red here? And do we need to have some difficult conversations? So now, of course, when we run all this, back to this point again, now that we've established this processing capacity, now we can really pivot to these secondary use cases and those edge, as we call them, those edge projects. I know we've got another case study here. This is one that's near and dear to Bill's heart, one of his favorites. I think he's probably in there once a week. Bill, take us through this international bank.
Yeah, I think this is a great example of having a metrics mindset, right? So these guys have been clients of ours for years, and they had the realization that they were using Nuix, the 2 separate labs in different regions, and by consolidating their licensing model, they were able to support 12 hours on in one region, 12 hours on in another region, and really maximize their utilization of the 24-hour day in the Nuix worker, right? It's sort of always on Nuix. It's the follow the sun approach, and it really just it shows what can happen. Because doubling your capacity effectively causes your marginal cost per unit to drop in half, right? And that arms these guys to go back to the business unit, 1, show the value of their team, and 2, make a case for doing more projects that maybe don't have the urgency to get done right now at a super high cost per unit, but at a cost per unit that's half that. Maybe it makes sense to start looking at some of those big data pools. Maybe it makes sense to start looking for PII and PCI on your network, right? It makes sense to get proactive if you've got capacity and can show a really low cost, marginal cost per unit. So it's a great sense of what that mindset is, and then reporting just allows you to actually demonstrate that work. It's one thing to put your thumb in the air and say the wind is going that direction. It's another thing to have hard numbers tracked over time that say, hey, this is the value of the work that we're doing, so give me the resources I need to expand.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Where would you put these guys on the maturity matrix? Are they in the middle somewhere? How far do they have to go to reach the utopian vision?
I think they're definitely phase 3. They're exploring some additional use cases and really maximizing the value of their existing mandate. The next step is really when they expand out of their existing mandate and into supporting multiple different teams inside of the organization. And that, that requires that they become a little bit of an internal salesman, right? And that's an internal advocate. And metrics make all the difference in the world when you're making the case for your team.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got about, say 12, 13 minutes left. We got a few more things to talk about, guys. So we definitely want to leave some time for some Q&A. I think we've got a few coming in already in the chat. So I'm just going to take you through just a quick couple more case studies around tracking capacity. And again, this opportunistic approach to move towards enterprise level Nuix. I've got two customers. One is a pharmaceutical, and then the other is a large insurance company. And they're both doing a similar thing. They're harvesting huge amounts of data in the numbers of billions of items out of some old repositories. And they're seeing the opportunity very clearly to do some, exposure reduction. And not really calling it governance yet because it's kind of been driven by the e-discovery teams, people that are worried about risk and are worried about future, investigations and cases. And they're seeing the need to take advantage of expiration. So let's say that these things that are over 7 years old and they are not on hold by any legal case, we can get rid of those by all means. Let's use Nuix Collector, which doesn't sound like a deletion tool, but believe me, it is. And they actually have a routine that from their Nuix workstation, they can initiate the deletion of millions and millions of useless pieces of data that have come out of an email archive. So this is, someone taking advantage of, wholeheartedly taking advantage of cleaning up, right? Okay, so with that, Bill, why don't you take us through a couple of examples that you've put together around sort of administrative bottlenecks and administrative cost?
Yeah, so this is just a great example of, in our experience, the labor of doing this work probably adds 30 to 60% in terms of cost. And so if you can optimize that, it has real value both to your team and also to your employees, right? If you take an ex-FBI agent, make it his job to process data, he's not going to be around for very long, right? He's going to go somewhere where he can be a real investigator, right? And so kind of tracking, time spent per case really helps you identify where people are spending their time and help you manage across multiple different roles, right? And that's important as you start to consolidate DFI teams with e-discovery teams, establishing cyber fusion centers. Managing people becomes a really critical component of this. The other thing that's a critical component of this, if we can move 2 slides forward, just from a time perspective, Michael, is the being able to charge it back, really being able to partner with the business, showing organizations the value of not just your team, but also your team for their department, right? Here's what you've asked us to do. Here's what we did for you in capacity, data processing, in time, human time spent, really goes a long way to helping defray the cost of legal or security as a cost center, and just helps you to partner with the business. Everybody likes to see some hard metrics of the value that you and your team have brought to people like them and to them specifically.
So, Bill, Chargeback sound a little utopian to me, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some people on this call going, oh, man, I couldn't even imagine getting this far. I mean, really? How far into the maturity matrix do you think you have to be to feel confident about actually starting a chargeback program?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a question of phases, right? So a number of our large clients already have law department operations teams and that have predefined reporting. And it's just a question of how hard it is to actually satisfy those requests, right? And so if you're doing it by hand, it can take you, 5, 6, 7 hours of management time every month to comply with those reporting requirements. If you can just pull it right out of the tool and feed it into their report, you've got more rigor, and it takes, 15, 20 minutes to do. The other thing that I encourage our clients to think about, though, is the difference between good and perfect, right? Perfect is being able to actually charge back to the business unit. Good is being able to show the business unit how much of your resources they consumed and the value of those projects for them. So, don't be afraid to get started, even if your culture isn't quite where you need it to be to monetize that yet.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, just recognition. Again, it's that quantifying cost that's going to get you there. What about this large manufacturing company? What are they doing?
Yeah. Well, so that's what I mentioned. We've got and they're relatively new Nuix users. They've got a sophisticated LDO team, and so having that internal metrics-minded culture goes a long way to setting priorities and making decisions based off of the hard numbers. So it's and they're a global organization, significant discovery profile. And it really also helps them do more with less, right? Rather than adding new teams, they made the smart decision of investing in new technology, right? So figuring out how to manage those resources, I think, is critical here.
Absolutely.
So, I know that we're approaching kind of the top of the hour here. We might have some questions from the group, but also, if you want to continue this conversation, Michael and I are both really interested in this subject. So, I know that we've got a couple of upcoming activities. Our CISO, Chris Pogue, is hosting a webinar in a couple of weeks that's focused on the mindset of hackers, right? And this is really compelling because from a discovery perspective, you have 30, 90 days, right? From a cybersecurity perspective, you've got a couple of hours to respond, right? So speed and utilization are critical. We're also a big fan of today's General Counsel Institute. They're hosting a cybersecurity exchange here in New York. In late May, they're hosting an e-discovery one in July. We'll be there, so definitely let us know if you'd like to join us. We're going out to Las Vegas in a couple of weeks, May 23rd through May 26th. We'll have a cabana by the pool. And then, of course, our user exchange for Nuix clients, 17th through 20th in Huntington Beach. It's a great opportunity to meet with smart guys like Michael, as well as other Nuix clients, and just brainstorm ideas and kind of push yourself to do more with the tool and the capacity you have. Michael, are there any questions that we can wrap up on with the... Yep,
we've got about 4 minutes, Bill. 3 questions, 4 minutes. I think we can do it. So I'm going to start you out here. Are the metrics you have presented built into the tool solution that Nuix offers? Yes, absolutely. Obviously, within the workstation, you have quite a bit of reporting capability, settings that you can tune, auditing, et cetera. And then that universal case reporting tool is a really powerful tool to synthesize all of those cases and the things that you found across them over time. Bill, what do you think? How should they start get started tracking these metrics?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And you got to acknowledge that if you're working with multiple different tools, or if you've got a fractured environment, it's a lot harder. But at least from a Nuix perspective, if you point that universal case search tool at your legacy data and just segment it maybe by matters and by time, it'll give you a good sense of your current state. And then, track back to the maturity table. And where are you today? Where do you want to be? And what's the value of getting there?
Okay, that's a perfect segue. Next question. Can I get a copy of the Nuix feature maturity table?
Yeah, it was a bit of an eye chart on our screen there. It's definitely something you want to spend some human time with. So if you reach out to Michael or to I, we can definitely ship you. We keep it as a paper copy because it's part of the Nuix guide to the corporate enterprise, and so it's pretty sensitive stuff here at Nuix, but we'd be happy to ship you a paper copy. You can take a look at it and familiarize yourself with that maturity table. We're proud of it. We helped put it together. So we
got one last one before we'll close out. Do your clients have a dedicated person whose job it is to track and report these metrics?
Yeah, I think that usually falls on that hero person, the person who has the vision for adding value to their enterprise. Sometimes it's a dedicated, this is a manager, this is an administrator. Sometimes it's somebody who just wants to get more exposure inside their organization. Some of the really large organizations do have, as I mentioned, dedicated law department operations teams, and so partnering with those guys is a really smart move.
You think it's a chance to be a hero? I mean, seriously, to individuals, you think they could build these projects, measure these things, and then, wow, they're on the fast track to the executive office suite?
Well, I mean, it's just, making good business decisions helps people who are subject matter experts become leaders inside of an organization because, as our CEO likes to say, he buys outcomes. Everybody buys outcomes. And so if you can make a compelling case for the value of an outcome, and if you can show how you'll track the adoption and show value at incremental stages, it's a great opportunity to win early and win big.
Excellent. All right, with that, guys, I think we got about 90 seconds back to you. Thanks, everybody, for attending. It was a great outcome. I had a good time. Bill, do you want to say goodbye? We'll sign off.
Yeah, thank you all. This was I'm glad you gave us an hour of your time today, and please feel free to reach out to Michael and I and keep up the conversation because we're excited about this stuff.
Yep. Take care, everyone.